just wowed our students with card tricks. He's a master at that. I'm just happy to have him back here. He was on stage 3 years ago, and just as importantly, he was here for reading the play of Midsummer Night's Dream, Charlie Brown, A Little Shop of Horrors, etc. And of course, he was also, as you've heard, a national prep wrestling champion, graduated in 05, went on to Maryland, where he was an All-American, and he founded Athletic Ally, where he and others in the general community, including people like Andy Roddick, Yogi Berra, Martina Navratilova, and young people like you in over 80 colleges across America have worked tirelessly in an effort to reduce prejudice in school against people who are gay, homophobia, challenge to homophobia. Again, I asked the question, what makes a guy do this? A straight man who's married and who has other interests? I think you'll get the answer tonight in meeting a really good soul. And here's Hudson Taylor.
How's everybody doing? I'm gonna take this off, and we're gonna do like a whole thing. Yay, Blair! Did I break it? No, it works. So, I don't even, hold on. Okay. There we go. How's everybody doing tonight? Good spaghetti meatballs? Yeah? Pretty good? Happy about it? So my name is Hudson. As you heard, I was a graduate of Blair in 2005. Tonight I'm going to kind of tell you about me, who the heck am I, what it is I'm doing here, how it is I came to be doing the work that I'm doing today. For starters, I am a wrestling coach, or at least I was a wrestling coach at Columbia University these last 4 years. Go Lions! Before that, I was a 3-time All-American wrestler at Maryland. Go Terps! There we go, take that. But the reason why I'm talking to you all tonight is that for the past couple of years of my life, I have been an out loud, proud ally to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. 4 years ago, I started a nonprofit organization called Athlete Ally, which is dedicated to educating and empowering students such as yourselves to speak out and stand up and make a difference in whatever way you feel you can. While I am very, very passionate about these issues today, I think it's important to point out that I by no means was always an ally. I think when we talk about prejudice in the world, when we talk about injustice, it's very easy to be apathetic to the experience of others. And that was certainly the case for me, and I think that there were 4 major obstacles. And I think there are obstacles for all of us on how we create a more inclusive culture. For me, the first major obstacle was actually the faith of my family. My great-great-great-grandfather was a China missionary. He pretty much brought Christianity to China. My mom went to a Bible college. My sister just graduated from a Christian college. And so faith was something that was always really important in my upbringing. But unfortunately, because of the faith of my family, for most of my life, I didn't feel like I could talk about LGBT issues. I didn't feel like I should care about it or be an advocate for it. I don't know about you, but I want my parents to be proud of who I am and what I'm doing in life. And so, unfortunately, because of the faith of my family, I stayed silent and I stayed complacent. The second major obstacle for me was that I was a wrestler. I started wrestling when I was 6 years old, and it has been and continues to be the most defining part of who I am. It has taught me how to treat people, how to overcome adversity, how to interact with the world. But it also taught me some really problematic stereotypes and assumptions. You see, sports is a gendered space. From the moment that we first participate, we are divided on lines of gender. We have boys over here and girls over here. Sport teaches girls how to become women and boys how to become men. And I feel like because of the culture of sport, I was taught that what was perceived to be bad was feminine. Right? And so the easiest way that I could diminish the efforts of one of my teammates was to use either a homophobic or a sexist slur. Would hear it all the time. The easiest way that I could diminish the efforts of a female athlete was to associate her with masculinity, or to throw around that lesbian label. Right? This is the culture of sports, and it's still very much prevalent today. Show of hands, how many of you in this room, let's say in the last week, have heard somebody say, that's so gay? Show of hands. Raise them high and look around. Right? Look at the number of hands that we have here. Right? A lot of us. Now here's the interesting question. Of those of you who heard that word used in the last week, how many of you, when you heard that language used, heard someone speak out against it? Show of hands. Now look around at the hands. Okay? So, what does this tell us? This tells us that there is a language and a way in which we speak to and about each other, which is still extremely prevalent. And yet, we have a culture where there are still very few people who are speaking out against it. Right? That's a problem. I would hope that if I were to come back here a year from now, that those hands would be flipped. That nobody would raise their hands that they heard it. Or if somebody did, that everybody would hear somebody speaking out against it. But that brings me to, I think, the third obstacle, and that's conformity. There's this social psychologist named Solomon Asch. Back in the 60s and 70s, he did this really interesting experiment around conformity. What he did is he would get 10 people to all come up on stage, 9 of whom were in on the experiment. Okay, so only one person was actually being tested. He asked them a really simple question. He said, which line does X match? A, B, or C? You had one really short line, one medium length line, and one really long line. It was very clear that only one of them matched. But what Mr. Asch wanted to look at, he said, what would happen if I got the majority of people to intentionally choose the wrong answer? If I got everyone to say C, an answer that's not right, how would that influence the actual decision-making of everyone else? And what he found was if he got everyone to say an answer that clearly wasn't right, that last person would follow suit. And I think what that experiment uncovers is that, we all have an innate desire to conform, to fit in, to be accepted and respected by our peers. Oftentimes, the path of least resistance is to say and do nothing, right? It's a lot easier for me to laugh at the joke than it is for me to call attention to it. The hazing that was just uncovered in Sayreville. Another example of it's easier to go with the flow than it is to speak out and stand up and do something about it. And so I think for all of us, we need to find the courage to combat the conformity. Conformity can be a very bad thing, but it can also be a force for good, right? If conformity tells us that it's cool to be kind, and that it's, everybody should be creating that inclusive culture, then all of a sudden everybody is a champion for inclusion. The fourth and final obstacle for me was a lack of awareness. I think privilege is blind to those who have it, right? As a wrestler, the athletic experience is an insular one. From the time I was 6 years old to this day, I spent all of my time with other athletes. Whether we were traveling, training, running, lifting, going to class, not going to class. I was with my teammates. And the fact of the matter was, because of the culture of sports, for the majority of my life, I didn't think I knew anyone who was gay. I didn't have any openly gay friends, family members, teammates. There was no one in my immediate social circle who was out. And so as a result, when I heard that language, I thought, why should I speak out against it if I don't know anyone who's affected by it? That was a failure of awareness on my part. And I think we all fail that awareness test in one form or another. Most of the time when I'm working with students, I think it's pretty clear that the use of that kind of language is not because somebody is homophobic or because they don't like a certain community. It stems from ignorance, right? I think we fail to realize that the intent behind our language is not always the same as the impact of that language. That while I may say something as a joke, You can never control how someone hears it, how it impacts their experience. And so I failed that awareness test for most of my life. I think at times I certainly failed it here at Blair. It's an interesting experience being in a boarding school because, when you're going to a public school, you have a public and a private life, right? You come to school, you're with your friends, but then you can go home and be your own individual person. At boarding school, that's not so much the case because, you go to class and then you go to practice and then you go to formal dinner and then you go to study hall and then, you're hanging out with your friends at night. So it's very hard to find private space. And I think that lack of awareness can be a challenge for all of us. Fortunately for me, that all started to change when I got to college. College was a big game changer. I went from this small boarding school to a college of 35,000. All of a sudden I was put into an environment of extreme diversity where people came from all over the world, different walks of life, different backgrounds and beliefs. And it was an especially interesting learning experience for me because I happen to be one of the few Division I wrestlers who also happen to be a theater major. Not so many of us, let that sink in. Yeah. Little shot of Hars. Yeah? Suddenly see more. We'll talk about that later. Anyway. That was fun. Yeah, Raz, gotcha. Yeah. Theater changed my life in a major way. I can remember sitting in class my first month of school, and there was this kid named Matt who sat to my right every single day. One day, 5 minutes before class started, Matt stood up, took a deep breath, and said, "Class, I have an announcement. I'm gay." There I was, like, oh gosh. I'd never seen anybody come out before, so I didn't really know what the proper protocol was. Was there a handshake that I was supposed to do? I don't really know. The room got really quiet. We all kind of looked around, not sure what to say or how to react. And there was this one person in the back of the classroom who had that perfect timing. The kind of timing you dream about having your whole life. You always want to be that person, but you never are. You know what I'm talking about? They saw their opportunity. They stood up. And they started the slow clap. It was glorious. First of all, I was so upset it wasn't me. I was like, no. But next thing I know, the entire class is standing and clapping and giving Matt high fives and hugs. And I'm watching this moment where Matt, the kid to my right, is taking one step closer to being truer to himself. He's not only welcomed, but he's embraced. He's treated equally, respectfully, without judgment. It's pretty cool to see that. Then I started to think, if that had happened on my wrestling team in my locker room, would we have started the slow clap? I don't know that we would have. But then to go back across campus that afternoon, to go back with my teammates, the guys who I should be most in line with, and then to hear them use that derogatory and demeaning language so casually, put this whole issue into perspective for me, made me take a step back and say, well, wait a second. This conduct is not what I want of my team. It's not what I want of my sport. But I think more importantly, it's not the legacy that I want to leave behind. When I look back in my life 50 years from now, I want to know that I made the world a better place for the people in it. I would like to think that if I was alive during the civil rights struggle, that I would have marched and I would have stood up and been an advocate. And I think 50 years from now, we're going to be asking ourselves that same question about this moment in time. And so it was because of Matt and his makeshift coming out party that finally, for the first time in my life, I thought, wow, maybe I can be better. Maybe I can be kinder. But I should say at this point, I wouldn't have called myself an ally. I knew Matt. I knew I should probably watch what I said when I was around him. But I think in order for us to create a more inclusive culture here at Blair, and in everything we do in life, we have to do two things. And I had to do two things. The first was to determine why it was important that I become conscious of my words. Why is it important that you hold your language to a higher standard? That we don't use homophobic, racist, sexist, ableist, androcentric, misogynistic, all the obias and the isms. That's step one, is to be more conscious of your words. And step two, which I think is a very important and necessary second step, is to then determine why it's important that when you see something, you say something. That you speak out when you hear other people use that kind of language. You know, it's one thing to say, hey, I'm kind, I'm courteous, I'm respectful. It's another to say, hey, that's not cool. One is the position of a bystander, the other an upstander, a role model, a leader, a hero, or a shiro. But this was the person that I wanted to become. And I realized, you know, it was actually a philosophy class that I was taking in college that in many ways has made me the advocate that I am today. The class was existential philosophy. And in that class, the most important question is not about the philosophy of art or beauty, but what is the meaning of life? Why are we here? You know, each of you has some sort of implicit moral compass. You have something inside of you that governs whether you do or do not act in every single situation. But very rarely do you put words to what that is, right? What are the principles that make you you? I thought, wow, if I'm going to be proud of myself and my character, I need to define my core values. And so I have boiled it down to 4, and I think these 4, in many ways, have inspired me to be doing this work today. The first is what I call the platinum rule, really one better than the golden rule. And it's this, treat others as they want to be treated. Right? And when we apply this to the LGBT community, for me it became really clear. The fact that kids are still being bullied, still being isolated and segregated in the dorms, on their teams. The fact that kids are still being made to feel as though they need to commit suicide or kicked out of their home. Those things made it very clear to me that every single day in this country, in our middle schools, in our high schools, on our college campuses, there's a group of people that is not being treated the way that they want to be treated. And I would challenge you, I would imagine that each of you could think of somebody here at Blair who's probably not being treated the way that they want to be treated. The second principle is sort of a utilitarian idea, and it's this. In everything you do in life, you should seek to maximize happiness and minimize suffering. I think when we talk about being an advocate or trying to change a culture, we oftentimes think big picture. You're like, yeah, I guess I care, but like, I don't want to like make it my thing. But you don't have to make it your thing, right? I think large change can happen in a very short period of time if we focus on the small, simple steps that will get us going in the right direction, right? So you can all probably pinpoint 4 or 5 things that you could do differently starting tonight to make somebody's experience here at Blair a little bit better. You could probably change a few behaviors to make somebody's time just a little bit brighter. And I think if we focus on those things, we're going to get to where we want to go. The third principle is probably the one that makes me as outspoken and passionate as I am today, and it's this. In everything you do in life, or no, that's not the right one. That's the wrong one. That's the other one. You should always act so long as the burdens of that action do not outweigh the benefits of that action. Okay? And what I mean by that is, you see, being an ally to any community will almost always do more good for others than it could ever do harm to yourself. Right? I want to do a little thought experiment for you. If I were to tell you that if you gave 5 minutes of community service, and as a result of that community service, you were going to save or change someone's life, would you do it? Nods are okay. I'll take nods. Yeah? 5 minutes, community service, change. Okay, sure. All right, well, what if it was half an hour? Half an hour worth of community service, save or change someone's life, yes or no? Yeah? Okay, good, good. A day. Yeah, I think so. I think I can do a day. Yeah. A week. What's the community service? Who are we helping? What are we talking here? Right. A month. A year. 5 years. 10 years. Eventually, at some point, you're going to draw the line. You're going to say, I'm sorry, but the burden to me outweighs the benefit to others. Spending a year or 5 years of my life committing myself to a cause is too much of a burden. And I think that's okay. But when we talk about being allies and creating inclusive cultures, it doesn't take a year, a week, or a day. It doesn't take an hour. It doesn't even take 5 minutes. It takes 2 seconds. It's those 2-second moments when maybe you're about to say something that you probably shouldn't. Or those 2-second moments when maybe you hear somebody say something and you choose not to speak out against it. I promise you that if you take ownership of those 2-second moments, you will save or change someone's life. It could be the reason somebody stays or joins a team. It could help them, do better in a class, or I don't know, just have an overall better experience here at Blair. Suppose when I first started all this work, my biggest fear was that by talking about LGBT issues, somebody would think that I was gay. Right? That's the big fear. Why does he care? But I realized 2 things. One, I know who I am. I know what I believe. There's nothing that someone could say or do that would change that. And the second is that some of my best friends in the world are gay. And so I do not see that as an insult. I would be proud to be a member of that community. So, yes, I may get weekly tweets from the Westboro Baptist Church. These things happen. But I also get emails every week from kids who say, you know what, Hudson? I joined a team. I'm doing better because of Athlete Ally and the work that you're doing. So at the end of the day, speaking out will always do more good for others than it could ever do harm to yourself. The fourth and final principle for me is this. You are responsible for whatever history of which you are a part. Right? I think there's a lot that you all can be proud of. As a wrestler, I can be proud of the matches we won, maybe the community service that we did, the academic standing of my team or of my class. But I realized you also have to take responsibility for the bad. If there is a single student here who's being made to feel less than, for whatever reason, that's on you. That is part of your history. That is part of your legacy at this school. There will never be another 2014, 2015 class. So whatever you do or don't do, that's it. And so I just would ask you, challenge you really, to take ownership of both the good and the bad. I think when you acknowledge it, when you embrace it, you're going to be all the better for it. So these were the 4 things that kind of inspired me to be doing this work. And so with all of that in mind, my senior year of college, I started the season ranked number 1 in the country in my weight class, training to win that national title. Didn't get it. Talk about that later. No. And I decided to start the season wearing this equality sticker on my headgear. It was something that I had seen on bumper stickers and laptops and knew that it generally represented something that I believed in. Little did I know that if it weren't for that sticker, I would not be talking to you all tonight. One day after practice, one of my coaches pulled me aside. He said, Hudson, I see you wearing this sticker and talking to your teammates about respect and inclusion, and I'm wondering if you would do an interview about why you care about these issues. I said, sure, absolutely, no problem. What I didn't know is that coach of mine was actually closeted, and that he was in the locker room the entire time while my teammates were saying these homophobic things, not feeling as though he could talk about it or call attention to it, feeling as though if he did, it would put a spotlight on him in an unwanted way. So anyway, I did this interview, and one of the things that's really, really important to me is that we start the conversation with as many people as possible, right? Whether you and I agree or disagree on any issue, progress cannot occur unless we are willing to engage and start a dialogue. So, when I did this interview, I asked if they would share my email address with the article. Wasn't ready for the response. A few days after the piece ran, I opened up my inbox, and much to my surprise, I had over 2,000 emails from closeted kids from across the country. 2,000 emails from kids who reached out and said, Hudson, I see you speaking out, and now I feel like I can join a sports team. I see you talking about these issues, and now I feel like I can go into the locker room and not be afraid. And my sport is everything to me. And this idea that there's an entire population of people that is not sharing in the same positive experience as I did is a shame. But it got me thinking. If a wrestler in a sport that people don't know or care a whole heck of a lot about, if I could get 2,000 emails for wearing a sticker, imagine if I had been a football player, or an entire team, or entire class or school, entire league speaking out and standing up. Those 2,000 emails would be nothing compared to the impact that an entire generation of allies speaking out could have. I said this in formal dinner, but I'll say it again. There has never been a successful social justice movement for a minority group without the support of the majority. Right? Civil rights, women's rights, gay rights. At the end of the day, if we are going to change our cultures, we need allies to stand up and speak out and do their part. It can't just be the folks who are affected by a particular issue, who share the burden of changing it. It just won't happen. And so with all that in mind, I decided to start a nonprofit. Since starting Athlete Ally, we now have 80 Athlete Ally chapters on college campuses. We have over 101 professional athletes who have joined the organization. I have the privilege of going to lots of schools, working with a lot of rookies in the NBA and Major League Baseball. But as I'm so often reminded, this is not the beginning of the end, but rather the end of the beginning. There is a tremendous amount of work to be done. There is a tremendous amount of injustice and stereotypes and prejudice that still exists, even here at Blair. And so, if you're still with me, you're like, all right, great, yeah, got it. I want to spend the rest of my time with you talking about the how-tos, how we change that, and how we go about creating a more welcoming environment. And so for me, there are two steps to this. The first is to become educated. There are a lot of issues that I don't know everything about. Even the ones I talk about, I continue to have to be educated and read and try to become better informed. And so if you do care about anything that I'm saying here tonight, there's a GSA meeting tomorrow. Go to it. That's what they talk about at GSA meetings. how to create a more inclusive culture. So think about just going to a meeting, because we can all be better educated about lots of different issues.
6:30.
6:30. Is that what? Good. Yeah, okay. So step one is to be educated. And step two, which I think is a very important and necessary second step, is that we become explicit about our commitment to inclusion. Nobody's a minority. So if you do care about a cause, you need to be vocal and visible about it. And I think there are a few ways that we can do this. The first is that if you don't feel comfortable engaging in a face-to-face conversation, start by using your virtual voice. Start by using Facebook and Twitter as a platform to let people know what it is you stand for and believe in. Put a video online as a school. We get professional athletes all the time to tweet things out. And I think that the beauty of the internet is that we live in a global village, right? So with one tweet, one message, you can reach somebody who lives halfway across the country. Somebody who lives in a community where they don't have friends or family or support structure that they can rely upon. We'll start by using your virtual voice. Step two, wear your beliefs on your sleeve. Many years back, not so much anymore, a lot of people wore those Live Strong wristbands. That was like a thing for a while. It's not a thing anymore. But the thing about it was, whenever I saw that little strip of yellow, I didn't need to start a conversation. I didn't need to ask questions. I knew just by seeing it that person supported cancer research. When we talk about being allies to any community, it is no different. Wearing an LGBT ally wristband, or putting a safe space sticker on your door, or on a faculty's door, or a pin on your backpack, those are visible signs of support. And while it may not matter to your straight friends, I can promise you that to the LGBT people in this community, they are looking for those wristbands and those stickers as a sign of support. I would also say that if you don't feel comfortable doing it by yourself, one person can feel like an island, but 3 or 4 or 5 people speaking out together can feel like an army. Right? At Athlete Ally, we've done a few things. We've helped organize kind of ally nights at sporting events, ally weeks. We try to get a pledge signed at the halftime of different sporting events. A college in Iowa, Grinnell College, actually just this past weekend, painted a Safe Zones emblem on the center of their football field. We do encourage teams to wear rainbow laces, right? There are lots of different ways which you can be creative about how you integrate this message of inclusion into everything that you do. So wear your beliefs on your sleeve. And I'd be happy to talk to you more about that if you want to brainstorm or think about things that you can do. The third one, and this is the one that I probably care most about, is that you fix the broken windows. There's a theory in criminology called the broken window theory. It says whenever we go into a given environment, we are constantly gathering cues as to what is and is not socially acceptable based on that environment. Okay? So if you go into a room and there are broken windows over there, that implicitly tells you, maybe I can break some windows. Right? The idea here is that our environment shapes and influences our conduct whether you know it or not. But it doesn't just stop with the built environment. It extends to our words. And I believe that any type of derogatory or demeaning language, whether it's used to actually diminish and divide or just said in jest, it is a broken window. Right? Anytime we use the identity of a group of people to form the basis of an insult, it is a broken window. Even the things like, oh, you throw like a girl, like those things are not, they're broken windows. So if we want to fix them, I think we need to call attention to them. And for me, the easiest way that we do that is next time you hear it, just ask the question, why? No judgment, no finger pointing, but just why? Why is that the word you use? We all know that we shouldn't use it. We all know it. We just have to be reminded that it's not the appropriate thing to do in a welcoming and inclusive environment. I would also say that if all else fails, you can always break out a good Gandhi quote. Right? My first month coaching at Columbia, I was in the locker room and somebody said something. I just look at him and I go, hey, when you diminish others, you only diminish yourself. He's like, okay. You all get it, words matter. And I honestly believe that if we were to pinpoint the 4 or 5 most common words that are hurtful here at Blair, and we were to eliminate them, that we would be 95% of the way there. Right? Fix the broken windows. The primary way that I've been trying to do this is through a pledge, which I encourage you all to go and sign on athleteally.org. It says, I pledge to lead my athletic community toward welcoming and respecting all persons, regardless of their perceived or actual sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Beginning right now, I will do my part to promote the best of athletics by making all players feel welcome and respected on and off the playing field. When one person signs it, I don't know that it makes a big difference. But I believe that if an entire team were to come together and sign that pledge, that it raises the bar. Once you have one team, you have 2. Once you have 2, you have 5. The next thing you know, the entire school or athletic department has taken the pledge. And then you can go conference by conference, state by state, until 3 simple sentences set a new standard of athletic integrity. I also want to share with you a little story. This past February, I went to Russia to protest Russia's anti-gay propaganda laws. And we did this campaign called Principle 6, where we got over 50 Olympians involved, and we got a lot of celebrities to wear these all this P6 gear to speak out and raise awareness. And I was in Russia, and I looked down at my phone, and I got a tweet from Rihanna wearing a P6 hat. I'm still kind of freaking out about it. The reason why I bring that up is because while this is my cause and my campaign, it does not have to be yours. If there is a cause you care about, make a pledge. If there's a policy that you want to see changed, write up a petition. Get students to sign it. There's strength in numbers. If you get enough people to sign on to anything, people will listen to you. If you organize and you mobilize, you will change the world. And nowhere do you have more of an ability to do that than the seats you're sitting in right now. You don't need to wait. Know that. I want to finish with a quote and a story, and turn it over for questions if we have the time. So one of my favorite quotes in the whole world is by Cesar Chavez. He said, "Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. You cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. I have seen the future, and the future is ours." Now, when I started this work, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what it meant to fight for social change. So I asked a friend, I said, what does that look like to try to fight for social change? And he said, Hudson, I want you to imagine yourself standing at the edge of a cliff. And I want you to all do this now. You're standing at the edge of a cliff. At the bottom of that cliff is the ocean. And beyond that is the sunrise. And when we speak out, we take one step closer towards that edge. We get a little bit insecure. We get a little bit unsure as to what our friends might or might not think, or what might or might not happen. When you are an ally and an advocate, and when you try to change the world, it becomes your responsibility to go towards the fear. Stand on that edge. This is the place for those who are fighting for social change. Once we're in this place, I can promise you all two things. The first is that from this place, there can be nobody who stands in front of you. And the second is that it then becomes your responsibility to describe that sunrise to everyone who stands behind you. That sunrise is the possible. It's what the world could look like. Now, I think it's a future without prejudice, beyond stereotypes, without broken windows. Now, that's why I'm standing up here. It's why I do the work that I do. And what I know is that if everybody in this room, if you commit to fixing the broken windows when and where they occur, because of you, that sunrise will be a reality. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share a bit about my work and story with you. And I just want to encourage you, go towards the fear. Thanks so much. Yeah, did you get the news? Any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts? Favorite movie, Shawshank Redemption? Right? I know. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
So Hudson, we've seen professional football play, professional basketball play.
Yep.
Do you think the wrestling community is ready?
Yeah, I think you're going to need to be ready because there's a national champ who's about to come out. So we'll see. It's interesting when you look at the culture of sports. I think there's a correlation between how inclusive the culture is and the contact nature of the sport, right? So when you look at non-contact sports, you have a higher, you have more out athletes. And so in wrestling in particular, it's the most like physical contact of any sport. So I think it's definitely, growing up as a wrestler, you got to ask two questions. What is that leotard thing you're wearing, right? And are you grabbing one another, right? Those are the two questions that I always had to explain away, shut up, no. And the easiest way that I could defend against that was to call somebody else a homophobic slur, right? And so I think that the contact nature of the sport sometimes brings about the language and the attitude and the perception that the culture is not inclusive. However, I think in sports and business, in any community, ultimately the most successful communities are the ones that are the most diverse. I think that in wrestling in particular, it's a sport that understands that you don't have to be tall or short or fast. There are lots of different body types that are successful at our sport. And so we are a sport of diversity. And I don't know, I mean, it certainly will be challenging. Obviously, I think you also can't make overgeneralizations about any community. While Blair may be totally inclusive, that doesn't mean all the Maple schools are inclusive. While one sport may be great here, another sport may not be. So I think time will tell, but ultimately it's a game of context, right? In sports, we're still in an era of firsts. So for a lot of athletes, a lot of wrestlers, we don't know a lot of openly gay wrestlers. So once you know that person, you're like, wow, I know that guy. We wrestled. He actually beat my ass. Oh, it's not a big deal. So I think we need to give each other context, or be given the context of having out people. But it's happening, and hopefully it'll go well. Yes. Not all at once. Slow down. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about what the athlete ally chapters at colleges and universities, what their work is like, and what their purpose is?
So our athlete ally chapters, really they meet, I think, once a month, and their goal is to figure out how to keep the conversation going, right? I'm going to leave here shortly, and if nothing changes after I leave, then my visit here is a failure. So ambassadors and chapters are our attempt at keeping the conversation going, so that it's not just, oh yeah, we had that speaker during that 1 month, but instead it becomes actually part of the identity of a school. And so our chapters will do, we really leave it up to them. We give a curriculum of about 30 pages of ideas and events and activities that you can do. We try to be a resource to anybody who starts a chapter. But really it's just identifying the people who want to be engaged and want to keep this conversation going. And then we, some of the things, we plan those events with mass pledge signings, or, a clothing drive for LGBT youth homelessness, or just ways to give back to the community, to raise awareness, so that it's not just a once-a-year thing. Documentary screenings. I imagine that there's probably a lot of these things that the GSA is working on, but what we ultimately see in high schools across the country is you have the GSA doing wonderful work, you have athletes who probably care, and yet there's very little overlap between the two, right? And so, either starting an athlete ally chapter or getting more athletes to join GSAs, I think is what is necessary, because until we're having regular, explicit conversations about these things, ultimately we're just going to keep, business as usual. Yeah.
Even in having those conversations, how do you get the people who are not here or are not in GSA or don't want to have an affiliation to it? How do you get them informed and get them involved?
Great. So there's a great book. Yeah. Repeat it. So how do we get the people who are not here, who are not in the GSA, who are the unlikely allies, or maybe the even non-supportive folks, to care? Great question. And it's not easy, or if it were easy, then it would just be done. There's a great book which I encourage you to read. It's called The Honor Code, How Moral Revolutions Happen. And in that book, it talks about how does large-scale social change happen in a very short period of time. So for instance, foot binding in China was something that was done for about 2,000 years. And then in the span of about 40 years, it was completely eliminated. And the way that we change a culture, and the way that you, I think, appeal to those folks who are not in the room, is not by saying that a certain action is right or wrong, right? I'm talking to athletes, and I say, hey, don't use homophobic language. chances are it may go in one ear and out the other. Instead, the way that we change a culture is by appealing to the dominant identity of a people. Right? So for athletes, what do most athletes care about? Care about winning. Right? So our motto is victory through unity. Right? We center on our efforts on this idea that in a more inclusive environment will make us better, win us more games. And so I think, depending on who your audience is, you need to frame it so that it's not about the particular issue, but instead this is not who we are as a people, as a school. A lot of things that I would encourage people to do is establish a motto or an honor code on your team or in a group or across campus. For instance, at Columbia, it was like, hey, every year we get the guys to establish a mantra, right? And so last year it was like, respect all, fear none, right? And so then, when anything happened, whether it was homophobic, sexist, racist, instead of saying, hey, that's wrong and here's why, you could just look at the person and say, hey, respect all, fear none. Because they then know that's not who we are as a team, as a school, as a community. And so it's just about aligning the core values, not about a particular hot button issue, but about an overall philosophy of respect.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about how your relationship with your family is now, but more broadly, how do you deal with those who have religious objections that are really strong?
Yeah. With my family, I would say it's good, but I would say it's still kind of complicated, right? My family was very comfortable empowering me to be this thespian wrestler, guy. But I don't think they were prepared for gay rights activists, right? That was not in the picture board of who they thought I would become. So I would go through my presentation with my parents and say, that's great, amazing, just, promise me you're not gay. Okay, yeah, let's start over. But they come from a different generation, a different worldview. Again, I think context is important. They still think our same-sex neighbors are roommates. They haven't kind of connected the dots on some of these things. And so I think it's still a challenge. But for my parents, the biggest problem or the biggest fear is what their church friends will think. And luckily that's starting to change, I was fortunate enough to meet the president because of the work that I do. And that is something that my parents were like, oh, wow, maybe this isn't such a fringe thing. Maybe this is something that is part of the world and the way things are going. But in terms of other folks in faith-based communities, I tried very hard to make my message as apolitical as possible, right? So I make it very clear, I'm not trying to change anybody's political beliefs. I'm not trying to alter anyone's faith. I'm just trying to create a culture where everyone can maximize their potential. And so what for me that means is that we create a neutral environment so that anybody, regardless of their religious beliefs, their sexual orientation, their race, their gender, are able to be themselves. And currently, there's a certain type of language and conduct that is preventing specific people from doing that. So I try to bring it back to, let's say what we're for instead of what we're against. If we talk about what we're against, we're probably going to disagree on a lot of different things. But what we're for, I think, is that everybody be treated with respect and dignity. And that everybody have a good time on their team or at their school. So I try to bring it back to what we're for, and I think that's worked particularly well. So I'll be up here afterwards if anybody wants to stop by and say hello. Grab my deck of cards and do some magic.
And Hudson, you'll be at breakfast tomorrow, correct? For anyone who wants to ask questions or sit down and talk with you for a little bit?
Yep.
Hudson, your favorite role on the stage?
My favorite role is definitely Little Shop of Horrors. That was so much fun. And
I wanted to keep singing.
yeah, I wanted to keep singing. No. Theater has been and always and it will be a very important thing for me because I don't think we're given the opportunity to really express ourselves or explore as a man. Certainly exploring emotions was never something that was like, yeah, let's go talk about how we feel about things. That was never done on the wrestling team, unfortunately. No, but I feel like theater was something that kind of allowed me to think through who I am and what I feel and what I remember and didn't like. So it was certainly a really positive experience. So when the auditions happen, I hope everybody goes out. Sorry, no. Is that a good thing? They're like, yeah, good, more than ever.
Getting eaten by a plant is something you wanted to explore.
Yeah, a hungry plant. As long as, yeah. As long as it'll grow for me.